So welcome to this webinar. Today's webinar, actually probably one of the more important webinars that you'll ever hear. I'm going to go into a lot of depth, not just about the current market. Well, I'm going to go into a lot of depth about the current market, but also strategies to help you deal with what's going on right now. And just to give you a little bit of insight about what's currently going on in the market, I think that this legal market right now for jobs, probably the worst that I've ever seen. And I've been doing this over 20 years and have a pretty good, Charms making coffee, a pretty good sense of the market and what's going on. And the present time, this is, like I said, by far the worst market I've ever seen. And it's especially bad for people trying to get positions in major cities that are doing work that's representing primarily commercial client, meaning anybody who's representing companies, meaning those are the clients and they're paying hourly bills. So practice areas like real estate, commercial litigation, patent prosecution, anything where the attorney would be representing companies as opposed to individuals. Those practice areas are all very slow in big cities. There are tons of layoffs happening. And for the most part, the only people that are having a good chance getting jobs in major cities right now tend to be partners as opposed to associates. And there is definitely a lot of dead weight and overhiring that occurred a couple of years ago. So if you are trying to get a job in a major city, doing work, company facing work, it's going to be very hard. And then the next thing is in terms of the type of firms you should be approaching, the largest firms like the Am Law and Tudor law firms are the hardest to get positions with, obviously. And if you are trying to get positions in practice areas where it would be representing companies, it's much easier to get positions with smaller to medium-sized firms if you're trying to look in big markets. And then the final point is if you are trying to do company-facing work, which again is like corporate, real estate, and other practices like that, the people that are having the most luck are looking at firms in other markets, meaning if you're in Chicago, it would be smart to look in Indiana and places like that because the smaller markets often have work that the larger markets don't. There's less competition for associates. And then when associates are trying to get positions in large markets, there's just too many people competing for the same jobs. So it's very important to make sure you broaden your search. And then the bright spot in all this is if you are in a consumer-facing practice area, which would be something like family law, trust and estates, workers' comp, personal injury, immigration, the market's very good. So it doesn't really matter what market you're looking at. People that are in those practice areas are getting jobs. And there is plenty of opportunity in large markets and small markets. And often if you're in those practice areas for this particular market, you're absolutely insulated for the most part against layoffs and work slowing down, as long as you're representing individuals, because that work seems to be going, keeping to go. And that means employment plaintiffs work, anything pretty much is plaintiffs work, anything where the clients are individuals that are paying. And what's nice is if you didn't go to the best law school, or you didn't do well wherever you went, or you're unemployed, or if you're in one of those practice areas, you're typically much better off than attorneys that are trying to get jobs in big firms. And in all cases, the most opportunity tends to exist outside of major markets. One of the smartest things any attorney can do is if you're trying to get a job is to look for positions outside of the largest market. So today's presentation is about practice areas self-destructing in firms. It's a very important topic. People are making all sorts of decisions about what type of practice area they want to go into. You may want to do corporate, you may want to do data privacy, you may want to do trademark, you may want to do IP litigation, and no one will tell you about how risky it is to be in certain practice areas and what to do. And this is an extremely important topic. It's so important because every year people choose to go into things like corporate, and corporate goes through cycles. If you're not a partner in a firm of business, when it goes through one of those cycles, you're going to be in lots of trouble. Trademark goes through cycles. Sometimes there's jobs, and then when the economy slows down, there's not. So you need to understand the cyclical nature of all these practice areas and what you choose to do with your career, what practice area you may even consider switching to in order to isolate yourself from lots of problems that can happen just by virtue of making the wrong choice of a practice area. And so years ago, everyone wanted to get into data privacy. Now There's by no means anywhere near as many jobs as there were before. So that creates a situation where you're going to may not have ability to work. Certain practice areas used to be very busy, like IP litigation. Now there's a situation where that's slowed down. We need to understand that practice areas at different points in time will actually self-destruct, and then the work will dry up. And then when the work dries up, we'll have a very hard time getting a position, and depending on where you're working. It doesn't matter what law school you went to. It doesn't matter what firm you're at. These practice areas become very difficult to get practice areas, to get positions. And when that happens, the practice area, there could be very few opportunities from a few years to many years. And many times it dies due to economic forces, like just the market slowing down for work. But then there's also geographic things that it can impact. There's different partners that are in individual firms and all sorts of things that will end up affecting it. But the bottom line is that if you're in a practice area for any length of time, you're going to go through work slowdowns. The type of firm you're at will determine whether or not you stay employed. So certain firms, especially like AmLaw, one of their law firms, never lay people off. Others do. Certain firms are isolated a lot of times from slowdowns depending on where they are or the institutional clients they have. But generally speaking, no attorney is safe from this when it happens. And I know of countless attorneys who were in positions where they were working 3,000 hours a year after year, but then the market ended up slowing down, and then they lost their jobs. Meaning you could dedicate your heart and soul to a firm, you give it everything you have, but then when the work slows down, you become cost center as opposed to a profit center because there's not enough work. And so they will let you go, and they will favor certain attorneys, but you won't get credit really for all the work that you did for so many years from the firm because they just let you go. So no one cares that you build 3,000 hours and then you lose your job, and it becomes much more difficult to find one. You need to be aware of all this. You need to be aware of joining firms that continually have work. Sometimes people will join firms just because of how much money they pay, but they don't realize that they might get employment security or advancement, which far outweighs the struggle you would go through billing all these hours and then not having a job. You really have to think about that. And once you're out of work in a certain practice area, if it's not busy in the entire city you're in, then people do things like they move over with their parents, or they decide to go to business school, or some people become writers. Other people literally start having bad psychological problems because they don't understand, like, how could they have worked so hard in law school and done all these things and then gone and worked so hard at a firm, and now they can't get a job. And generally when you can't get a job, it's about economic forces as opposed to anything wrong with you, especially if you got a job at a large law firm. The other things that happen when work slows down is, instead of admitting that the work slowed down, a lot of firms will start giving you very bad performance reviews, and you won't know where that's coming from because everyone said good things about you when it was busy. But now all of a sudden the firm's kind of against you. I've seen people, again, have incredible psychological problems. These are attorneys that went to top law schools and have great backgrounds. I've seen people become drug addicts. I've seen people start families, which is nice. I've seen people join religious cults. A lot of people are able to get jobs in-house. Some people are able to join small law firms. Lots of them are able to start their own practices. Some will go to work for the government. They go to foreign countries and travel. I've seen resumes of people that became truck drivers and managers of fast food restaurants. It's very funny, but it's true. Paying minimum wage, in fact, as I've seen, I wrote this. So a lot of things happen when markets slow down, and you need to be aware of it. And you need to be aware of your choice of practice area. You need to be aware of the type of firm you're joining. And people might say something like, oh, I used to work with Skadden, which Skadden's a great firm. Skadden, by the way, is not a firm that really lays people off. I don't have anything really negative to say about them. But there's lots of firms. It could be Sidley and Austin or whatever. But you see these resumes, and the law firms let them go when things slow down. They're businesses. You need to remember that any place you're working is a business, and it's going to advance you, and it's going to pay you according to its way of making the most money in business. That's how it works. There's nothing wrong with a firm, and that's just how it works. And so you need to understand, what are you doing with where do you understand that where you're working is a business and how you have to contribute much more than you take. And not only that, but you have to be able to choose a firm where you're going to be more insulated from that because of different things like institutional clients and so forth that they're doing and they need your work. None of this is a joke. It's very serious. And this is something that no one seems to understand. I've gone and given presentations and speeches at major law schools to people. And when people listen to this and don't believe that this will affect them, but it does, it affects most attorneys. And so you have to choose the firm you go to based on the ability for you to weather practice areas. And this presentation, by the way, and I'll take questions, of course, after it. But the thing about it is that it doesn't just affect associates, it affects partners. Partners could bring in $5 million. I was talking to one guy today. He brought in $5 million last year, and then he brought in $5 million a year before. And all of a sudden, the firm decided that there was problems with him, and they decided not to give him credit. And so for him, the work effectively dried up because that's how he got compensated. And so partners are affected by this. I talked to another partner before him, and that partner had gone over from one major firm to another major firm to start a practice area for them. And then to take his skills and start a practice area. And he got over there, and then the firm didn't let them do that. They represented they didn't. There's all sorts of things that end up happening to attorneys when they're moving firms, or moving firms when they're going to firms where practice areas. They decide in this particular case, the person wanted to do class action litigation, and the firm decided after they went over there that they didn't want to do the type of work. So effectively it's self-destruct. So I see daily, I talk to attorneys each day, and at different points in time, whether the economy is very good or it's not, I see people self-destructing practice areas, and when they're unemployed, it's very difficult to get a position. I've seen law firms, a single law firm let 50 associates go during a slowdown in markets where, like Silicon Valley, where everything may be contracting. So there's no interest, and in-house places are having problems. So there's no interest. And when you are let go, if you're in a self-destructing practice area, the firms that you're trying to work in are very slow. And then people will prefer to hire the people that are employed is unemployed. So what does that mean? That means if you're in a practice area that slows down and there's limited number of openings in the market you're trying to get a job in, what ends up happening is that the law firms will favor the people that aren't laid off, because obviously if they weren't laid off and the firm's slow, then that says good things about their work or their hours compared to the people that were laid off. So once you get thrown in that pile of the laid off people, it makes everything much more difficult for you in order to get another job. And it's practice areas, when they slow down, if you're let go, it becomes very difficult to get a position, and that position. And what happens in a law firm is when you're let go and you want to come back, they typically won't hire you. They won't hire you. That's just how it works. They won't hire you even if they like the quality of your work, because they know that there's always a threat that you're angry and you won't commit as much because your heart has been thrown and you don't feel good anymore. So they want people that are enthusiastic and think that they're going to continue being employed. So it's just, people don't have employment security. So this is a statement I see for someone that's unemployed from a firm. Let's see here. What's this? Someone who's unemployed from a firm wants to come back. They may say, I see you have 5 openings for fourth-year litigator. You may not remember that you let me go 2 years ago when you saw a big case or whatever, market slowed down. My wife has divorced me in the interim. I've been living on peanut butter sandwiches, driving a 20-year-old Toyota, and sharing a apartment with a few guys on the bad side of town. I'm looking for a job. I'm ready to put my Ivy League law degree to use and come back to work. I had great reviews when I'm there. This has just been just saying this, so it's going to happen. But the firm will typically not want to hear from you. They won't help you get a job. Sometimes they'll point you in a direction to get a job, but they're not going to make it easy. And these are just funny things they're saying, but there's just a lot of truth to this. And the law firm, this is not exactly, it would be much nicer, but the law firm is not going to be happy about that person coming in, and they want to maintain a certain level of enthusiasm for the people that work there. And there's all sorts of things like this in the legal profession about how hard it is to get back into a firm once they let you go. Rarely happens. It happens. I've seen it happen, but just this morning, I had 3 phone calls with Zoom meetings with attorneys I'm working with, and one of them had been there for 2 decades at his previous firm and then left. And then when the work slowed down, then he wanted to come back, and they basically blew him off. That's just what happens. And sometimes the firms will steal business from an attorney or do questionable things, and then the attorney will want to come back and they don't let them. So what happens is, just so you understand, and I'll talk more about these practice areas in a few minutes, but what happens when a practice area is hit by an economic or other force, the law firms will let attorneys go, and those attorneys that are let go typically will never come back. And then the firms that they could work at typically will not hire them as well after that attorney's let go. And then even the attorneys who are still there will have a difficult time advancing or staying employed if they're partners and the work slows down. So what happens is partners also often lose their job. The nice thing about a law firm is it's set up to keep practice areas or keep attorneys busy in different practice areas. So if corporate slows down, then the litigation work will help keep the partners paid if their work's not slowing down. So it's nice how law firms are set up to do that, but it can be pretty devastating in some cases where that kind of dries out. And when that happens, especially to associates and things, one of the best things they do to keep employed is they may move back to where they're from if it's not a major market, or they'll work in smaller markets until the market picks up. And that's actually a very good thing. So if you are an attorney, there's just a piece of advice. And again, this is a very bad market. So you maybe have lost your job or be unemployed. One of the dumbest things you can do is to try to get a job in a big market. If you are in a commercial facing practice area, meaning you're representing companies that are paying money to law firms, and that work is slowing down. Things like real estate right now are just doing horribly because of a bunch of factors. Corporate's not doing. There's all sorts of things that happen. So if you're trying to compete in a large market for those jobs, and you don't have the most stellar qualifications, and you're going to have a very difficult time keeping your job. Getting another job. It's just very difficult. So the smartest thing you can often do is to move to a smaller market, or a market where you have connections. For example, if you're working in Chicago and everything slows down, and you're from Quincy, Illinois, which is a city, and I wouldn't recommend living there, but you could, and so it's probably too small. But if you're from that town and you wanted to move out there, and there was like a 30-person firm that did corporate or real estate or whatever, that might be a smart move, because you could certainly go back to a large market later. My role here is I've been reviewing resumes and talking to attorneys for 25 years. So I have a fairly decent sense of what happens when markets slow down. I've seen what attorneys do that's right. Then I've seen what they do that's wrong. Hold on. So weird. For some reason, Alexa came on. Anyways, yes, I've seen so many people make mistakes when this happens and lose their jobs. It happens to attorneys everywhere. And again, I will talk to you about the different practice areas right now. I hope that this helps, because it will show you what practice areas are safe. It'll show you where you should be working. If you want to keep employed, it will show you all sorts of things that are just crucial to understand. And I think just being on this webinar and listening and understanding this, I think will literally change the direction of your career and your life, and save your career if you are, fortunate enough to be watching this, because it's just, again, I've watched this happen for decades. I've watched attorneys continue going and do well in bad and different economies. And so I will talk to you a lot about that today and how that works. And it could save your career. This is the kind of information that I feel that most attorneys should learn in law school, because if they did, they would make different choices than a lot of people would make. So the first practice area is litigation. Litigation can actually self-destruct, meaning there can be problems in it. It's always a risk, and depending on the type of litigation you're doing, and it's a risky practice area. And most practice areas. I worked with an attorney not too long ago that started her career at Jones Day and then was a litigator there in New York and then moved over to Quinn, which is an awesome firm, both great firms, with a bunch of attorneys to work on a giant intellectual property case. Everything was involving Sam's, and she brought other attorneys with her. So other litigators came over from Jones Day, and they were getting a lot of work that they liked on a high profile case from very good experience and basically very much enjoying being at Quinn. She would bill 3,000 hours a year for a few years and put her heart and soul into the case. And when the case settled, she was only able to bill 1,500 hours because there wasn't enough work. And then the firm let her go, along with some other associates, came over from Jones Day. And now she's been looking for a job for over a year. Now, does that mean she's a bad attorney or Quinn's a bad firm? No, this is just their businesses. And Quinn's entitled that you would do the same if you're a business. And this is just how it works. But if you're in a firm and you're expecting to continually get a free flow of work and something self-destructs, then you're in trouble. And by the way, the only way to protect yourself from slowdowns in the market and firms is to make sure that you are putting a substantial amount of time into trying to get work from clients outside the firm. It's really the only way. It's the only thing that people do to survive. And those who don't often have a lot of trouble. So she was laid off, and she basically said no one wants to hire a laid off attorney because she'd lost her job. And again, in New York, then a lot of markets, Los Angeles, there is a lot more. When the law firm has to choose who to hire, they have two choices. They have an attorney who's employed, which means they're probably doing good work. They like them. They're not going to let them go. Or they have an attorney that's unemployed, which means something's off. Something's off for the attorney, and they have lost their jobs. I was talking to a woman this morning. Again, I talk to candidates and firms all day. And I was talking to a woman this morning, and she had told me she was getting ready to go into a firm for an interview. And then the firm had looked her up, and they're like, wait a minute, she's missing from the website. And so they emailed, and I was like, wow, I guess she's missing. And so I called her, and she was going in for the interview. And I always talk to any one of my kids before they go to an interview, after interview, and I'm always talking to them to figure out what's going on. And so Kara, this is the first I've heard she'd been laid off. So I called her and did a Zoom with her, and she said the culture isn't good. And I was like, okay. And then I said, what about the culture? And she said, oh, there's not enough diversity. I didn't like the way work was assigned and all this kind of stuff. And so I kept probing. And it turns out she'd given some presentation about, I don't know, some sort of bias, unconscious bias or something that, to the entire firm, and then implied that the firm was doing all these things biased against attorneys and things. And that obviously put her on the wrong side of doesn't make the firm scared. If someone's saying that there's all these things wrong and the firm needs to make all these changes and it's discriminating against all its attorneys, that's not a good way to get a job, to keep your job. You don't keep your job if you're threatening the firm. And I'm not saying there's anything right about unconscious bias. I don't even know if that was what it was. It was something like that. There's nothing right about it, but you don't put yourself in that position. So that's why she lost her job. And when you hire someone like that, or law firms, wait, they're unemployed, there could be something. They think, what is it in that person's background that may cause them to be unemployed? And in this case, that was very clear. It was someone that had gotten up and made a 1-hour CLE presentation about how the firm was doing all these things wrong. And that's not really the place of a second-year associate. So I'm just letting you know, like, some of the things that law firms are afraid of when they're talking to people. So if they're not employed. One of the oldest firms in California history, Heller Ehrman, I think it was founded in the late 1800s, actually interviewed there. It was one of the first firms I interviewed when I moved to Los Angeles, but it closed its doors. It literally, the entire firm, over 120, 30 years old, closed its doors because it had several large cases that settled, like, one after another. And the law firm had lines of credit and things that could no longer pay because it was relying on those to pay everyone, and it just had to close its doors. If that happens, no firm is safe. And litigation also moves an economic cycle. So if you choose that as a practice area, if the economy gets slow, litigation actually tends to get busy. it gets busy because what happens is during economic slowdowns, a lot of people start suing. They realize that people that ripped them off when the economy was good, and they're trying to recover money they may have lost due to things like bad things that might have happened when the economy was safe. So litigation actually is countercyclical, which is cool. And it can actually get busier for people, for firms when the economy's slow. But there's always danger within individual firms, because individual firms could have problems and literally collapse or lay a lot of people off. And in what kind of happens, it's funny if you watch what firms do, but the firms that charge the highest hourly rates often will get things going and get different firms, companies and stuff all fired up to sue and that sort of thing, or to fight things. And the same thing that with defense, people tell people that they're in the wrong and get everyone going. And then same thing with contingency law firms, class actions and all that sort of stuff tends to actually pick up a lot of times with bad economies. But the point is that things, when the economy slows, it's actually often a good idea to be in different types of litigation, because things can, especially commercial and plaintiffs type work, because things often get busy, and it tends to be a boom and bust with law firms, depending on the economy. And it's typically there's a lot of stuff going on in terms of activity in slow economies. And then also what happens is when people come out of school, they're often hired for practice areas that they may not be suited for. So corporate attracts a certain type of personality. It's typically people that like math and science and accounting, things like that, as opposed to litigators who like reading and writing and things like that. So when you come out of school during a slowdown in corporate, you're more likely to be hired as a litigator than a corporate attorney. And you may not actually have the personality for that, but that's what happens. And so you need to be aware when you're coming out of school, are you really choosing, or if you came out during a slowdown in corporate, are you really in the correct practice area that makes sense for you? And you have to, people get thrown into different practice areas depending on how busy it is. And then during law firms, can be very dependent, like I said earlier, on revenues that come in from litigation during slow periods. So you will know, depending on the economy, what good, how strong your practice area is typically. And practice areas, partners will become dependent on revenues if they're slow, on revenues from different types of practice, from different practice areas. So for example, like 2009, when there was a slowdown there, and even IP litigation was like a really hot thing that was supporting a lot of firms. It's that other thing that happens that's funny to watch, but it's not funny, but it's very predictable. And I say this just from having spoken to partners and large law firms and things. People will do an awful lot of work on litigation, many times, often arguably stuff that doesn't need to be done, but to drive up the revenue. And then by the time the transactional practice areas pick up, a lot of those clients become gun shy. So they have spent all this money on litigation. They may feel like they didn't get much from it. So you're talking about commercial litigation in particular. And then they become very gun shy about doing litigation in the future because they spent so much money on it in the past. And law firms are ecosystems where things kind of work, one practice area supporting the other. And then the other thing that happens is that when litigators get very busy and they're bringing in more revenue than corporate attorneys and so forth, they may often start being resentful of the corporate attorneys, and then they start looking for new firms that will give them more money. So that whole process starts during different economies. And then if enough attorneys leave, then the law firm can business gets slow in other practice areas, the firm can self-destruct and implode. What happened to Heller Ehrman, which was actually a very big, well-known firm that I think it actually advertised on 60 Minutes once, but didn't have all the television ads. But this particular firm self-destructed when there was an economic meltdown, and they had a very strong corporate practice, but in early 2000s, corporate just fell off the face of the earth. The litigators were supporting the firm, but they became resentful that so much money that they were bringing in was going to going to the corporate attorneys. And so they all picked up and left. And then the same thing happened. They had a line of credit. They could no longer. All this was just what happens is when the cases start settling and when the fees get too high, and then companies become gun shy, and then the work for litigators slows down. So the idea there is that when the economy's slow, I'm just trying to explain this in very simple terms for litigators and it applies to corporate attorneys. When the economy is slow, litigation often picks up and it becomes very busy. And people get clients fired up and everyone tries to about wrongs that happened or things, and then everyone litigates very hard. Then clients feel like they're overbilled, so they start settling a lot of cases, and then litigation becomes very slow. And then there's layoffs and people lose their jobs. This can happen, becomes very difficult in different markets when this pattern happens. And I hope I'm making sense, because I realize as I'm talking about this, it may not make sense. But what I'm saying is that litigation can go through boom cycles during bad economies, which is usually happens. When they come out of a bad economy or after a few years, clients do not like it because they feel like they're spending too much money on litigation. Cases settle and people go to other people lose their jobs. And sometimes this isn't really that important. But what happens, it's funny, is that during very good economies, when corporate's doing well, a lot of litigators want to go into corporate. And there's a cycle where people obviously, corporate's slow, then a lot of times corporate want to go litigator and so forth. But there's just different types of ability. I wouldn't just contrast a little bit about the. But yeah, so I don't remember need to go into too much more detail about switching practice areas. And the biggest point I think that I want to make about being a litigator that's important for you choosing a practice area that you want to go into, it's that litigators, it's a different type of skills. So this is just something that I want to make sure everyone's aware of because it's very important. Litigation, most attorneys go into litigation. So if you choose to go into litigation, you're joining a boatload of attorneys that are going into litigation. There are a lot of litigators. And to get into the largest firms as a litigator, it's very important that you have things like federal clerkships, that you have the best grades from the best law schools, because there's a lot of competition for litigators, especially at the top firms. You need very good skills. But the problem is that, again, most people go into litigation. Because most people go into litigation, that there's just a lot of competition. You learn about how to be a litigator essentially in law school, and you learn the basics of it. But the problem with being a litigator as opposed to other practice areas is if you learn another practice area, which could be like real estate, corporate, patent, and so forth, you are learning a skill that very few people have. In contrast, these are technical practice areas where if you put 100 attorneys in a room or new graduates, you might get 5 that go into real estate. And you might get, or maybe you get 7 or 10, I don't know, but you would probably get 60, maybe more of them that go into litigation. So there's just a lot of litigators, and they're less unique. And because they're less unique, when you get more senior as a litigator, your practice, it's very difficult to stay employed because there's so many people like you. It's very difficult to go in-house as a litigator, and it can make it difficult for you to remain employed. And there's a lot more importance if you're trying to do commercial litigation than on your having clerkships and grades and things than compared to a transactional attorney. So transactional attorney, if you learn to be a corporate attorney and you get trained in a decent firm, then you are pretty much employable at other large law firms. They're not going to take a lot of time caring about your grades and so forth compared to that. An example would be someone who does securitizes subprime auto leases. There are literally attorneys that do stuff like this. And then the law firm sees them, there's hardly any applicants for that job, and they jump on it. I have openings, like I have an opening in Sacramento for a real estate attorney, and it's a big size firm. They haven't been able to find attorneys in months. I had an opening for a senior real estate attorney in San Jose recently, and we sent a candidate there and they hadn't seen someone in months. It was commercial real estate. So a lot of times when you're in a very unique practice area, without a lot of people, it could be much easier to get a position compared to being a litigator. So again, the law firms probably even care where you went to school. If you get training in a transactional practice area, corporate, real estate, all these types of things. The law firm, it's really just the fact that you have the training that's more important compared to your schools and stuff. And the problem with litigators is very interesting because so many litigators out there. There's just an amazing amount of litigators. And I've seen people at major firms just with these incredible qualifications. They've done their clerkships and written all these law review articles and done these incredible cases made, but there's just so many of them that it becomes very difficult to get a position. And litigators, it's actually much harder to bring in work than a corporate attorney because you're only brought in when there's conflict. It's very important to understand your employment options if you choose litigation. I wanted to make a couple quick points about litigation that I haven't made. I've been talking mainly about commercial litigation, which is representing companies. Another type of litigation is personal injury, for example, and that's always busy, or insurance defense is always busy, or wage and hour work, or employment defense, or employment plaintiffs work. So if you choose a practice area, instead of trying to do work for companies, you try to do work for individuals. That in your litigation practice, you're going to be often much better off. I'm in this business group, and there are attorneys in this business group that are personal injury attorneys that went to top, not good law schools, like law schools that aren't even accredited nationally, that are sitting around in Los Angeles hanging on buildings. Meaning they're just like floor an office building, or they're not even, they're virtual law schools, but these people are making millions of dollars a year as personal injury attorneys or immigration attorneys. And they have all this just incredible success that you normally wouldn't think of. So a lot of times if you go and it's also when you go into things like insurance defense, it can be easier to get insurance companies as clients. There's all sorts of things you can do when you go into plaintiff's work. Litigation, what I've talked about so far is just company or people that are doing work for companies and how that is affected if you're trying to do that type of work. But if you're working for individuals, that litigation can be an exceptional practice area. You can a lot of money and you can do very well. I'll tell you just one quick story is when I was in law school, I literally just giving a sense of how motivated I was, and I'm not bragging, and I was just like interested in business being part, but I wrote a book about personal injury attorneys. That I went around the country interviewing them in various markets, like small markets, medium-sized markets. And so I would go into these offices and I might go into a small town and the person would be like a general practitioner. They would do trust estates or whatever you wanted to, but they would have a big billboard on the freeway and they would just say, listen, 90% of my revenue is from personal injury. And then you got to talk to other people and they'll tell you the same thing. And so you can do and I would talk to attorneys in mid-sized cities and they would be kicking and doing well. And I would be amazed. And if you want to be a litigator, you're often better off going into consumer facing practice areas than you would be going into commercial. And just a quick story. I've seen people, but literally with Supreme Court clerkships that weren't able to get jobs after leaving law firms for 4 years and going and do something like writing screenplays. So it's just very difficult for commercial litigators to stay employed for the long term. They do, but it's difficult. And self-confidence in the business can waver because you may be making a lot of money in a law firm, but it's difficult sometimes to build a business and bring in clients. Consumer-facing practice areas, which I'll talk about when we take Q&A here, are often a much better idea for litigators if you want to have employment stability over the long run. Representing individuals, it's easier because you get a lot more people often than enough. The next practice area is corporate. I once had a recruiter working for us. It was in, 2001, or maybe it was 2000, I don't remember, but I had a recruiter that literally almost went insane during an economic slowdown. And thinking back, that I helped him enough that I feel like I could have done a lot more. But when he started, he was about 200 pounds, very fit. He was a tall guy. He was like 6'2" or something. And he'd come to me to work. He'd been at a major law firm. In one way that I used to get a lot of recruiters to work for, find people that I'd find people that were in law firms, didn't like it, and were interested in something else, as they would become recruiters. And so he joined us in November of 2000. It was a time when there was a dot-com bubble, which everyone around this call may be too young to remember. But what had happened is all this money was going into funding these new businesses on the internet with the idea that people that did it would become billionaires or whatever. You get the idea so the stocks of these companies that rocketed, and this went on for a couple of years, and then a lot of people got very rich, but then at the same time, they realized that these companies weren't generating revenue, and everyone just kept saying, what's going on? And then all this stuff just blew up, and when this bubble burst, and so all these corporate attorneys, just tens of, I don't know, all over the country, lost their jobs. There was nothing. Literally, you go to New York, nothing. LA, nothing. These are huge cities because everyone was losing so much work. But anyway, this guy joined when the dot-com bubble burst, and he was taking phone call from people who lost their jobs in these major firms. Now, I don't actually know that this is accurate. Sullivan, Cromwell, or even Simpson, Thacher, Gibson, Dunn. These are put in there. Those are all really big firms. I don't remember people from Gibson, Dunn personally losing their jobs, but it could have happened. But it was the major law schools and these are just, what I'm saying is these are just A+ law firms. There's some firms just never lay people off, and I believe that those are among them, but there's not many. There's probably less than 10. But people just kept calling, coming into the office, and everybody wanted a job, and he wanted to help them. He'd get a can, he'd be like, this person's number 5 in their class, and like a Sears Prize winner and stuff. And he'd come into my office just amazed, and I would tell him he's unemployable. And then for 3 straight months, this guy, he would come in all weekends, and he would do everything in his power to try to place the people. And he would and back then you sent faxes and things, and we put letters together to send to the firms. And in 3 months, he'd gone down like 160 pounds, and he just looked different. There was no different. His face was just anyway, and he'd never failed anything in his life. He was a sort of star athlete in college, and always had the ability, he believed, to achieve anything he could, anything. And so this happens in corporate. It typically happens every 8 years. The market freezes up in an event that's just completely cataclysmic. And what happens is people just lose their jobs all over, and they come out of those who don't can consider themselves very lucky for not having lost their jobs. Now, I do want to say a caveat at the beginning of this is that what's interesting is most of these layoffs and things will typically happen in the largest market. They'll happen in the attorneys in the largest markets. They'll happen to people that are specialized in things like M&A or securities or different types of corporate work. But in smaller markets, often the firms are doing more general corporate work. They're helping corporate advice and different things for smaller companies, and they typically don't slow down as much. So that's another reason why, if you're trying to work in any practice area and you want to be safe, I mean, you are often better working in smaller markets, either at the beginning of your career or after getting some experience in a larger firm initially in your career. During the 2008 slowdown, it was 2008, 2009, the slowdown kind of hit really hard in 2008. And there was one major law firm I saw in Silicon Valley. They took all of their junior corporate attorneys and they put them into a different building on the campus they had different buildings, and they put them all there in almost like you call it waiting to get laid off. They had them start, and then they decided for all the new attorneys that were coming in, and I guess some other junior ones, they put them all in the building because they didn't want them to start affecting the people that were getting work over in the kind of main building. So they kept them all over there so they wouldn't socialize and work with their attorneys that were doing well in other parts of the firm. And often what attorneys, what the law firms do is just something to think about, and it's pretty sad. So if you managed to get a job and you're an attorney that didn't go to the best law school or whatever, you're going to often get laid off first compared to the people that have better qualifications. So say you're working as an example, you're working at a big firm in Chicago, and there's people there that went to Harvard and Stanford and the University of Duke, say, and did really well there. And then you went to University of Indiana or University of Illinois or Case Western or something. You're more likely to get laid off and the market goes down and be one of the first than the people that went to Harvard or whatever, because that's just you are an attorney. that manage to get a job in a major law firm and you're junior and they decide who to lay off, they're often going to lay off the people with law schools that, aren't, and they start often at the big state schools, and then it's not pleasant. So I'm just warning you that if you're considering going to a big firm, you don't have the best qualifications, that the market slows down, you're often going to be much more likely to lose your jobs. Let's see, they did this third-tier law schools, maybe second-tier law schools, and then they come up and they will often do layoffs depending on the school you went to, because that's all they have to go on if you're a junior attorney. And so a lot of times people with the worst qualifications will be let go first. And I think keep that in mind. So when things slow down in a firm, when they lay people off, they should, and they often do, keep the people that do the best work and work the hardest. That's one of the main things they look at. But if you don't have a lot of history there and they haven't had a lot of work, they typically will let you go based on your law school. Corporate, like I said, moves with the economy. And when market's doing well, people do well. When the market slows down, corporate will stop in its tracks. But again, this affects larger markets and people that are trying to do the most sophisticated work. But if there's not much going on and there are not big deals happening, companies are batting down the hatches, then what happens is the companies are not going to give a lot of work to outside law firms. So just a piece of advice that I would give, if you're a corporate attorney and we're considering being a corporate attorney, there's nothing better than going to a market like New York or Silicon Valley to get really high-end experience and to do very well in your career. And if you do get a position in one of those markets or you have one, my advice is to just give it your all, to do the best work you can, to learn the most you can, and really become someone that's very good with clients that partners trust, and just do your absolute best, because you can do well. And if you're the top and you're just very dedicated and you do the work as well as you can, the odds of you losing your job are less than if not. And it's one of the best times to become a corporate attorney is when the market, there's a lot of enthusiasm, economy's growing. And if you can get in there and ride that out for 5-6 years until until you're well established and learn what you're doing, then you'll be much better off. Another thing about corporate that's important to understand is it's a very good skill to have, because you can always go in-house with that, being a corporate attorney. It's actually much easier to get business. If you are a corporate attorney, you should try to start getting business immediately, meaning you meet with people, you try to go out and meet with people that are in-house and so forth. You try to develop clients, you stay in touch with your law school classmates or whatever it takes. That's on a big market, but a big market does take about 5 years to learn a skill, and you can often hold on to your job if you do very well, especially if you get clients. The final thing about corporate is it can be, if you are up to it and you feel that your job is in danger or something, it's often a very good move to go to work in smaller markets when the economy slows down. Now, a smaller market literally could be a suburb of a major city. So you could go to work at a firm that works big clients. It might be in a suburb where no one's applying to, or in a state or other place, but that works though. I'm working with a guy right now. He has an incredible record. He went to Harvard for college, Harvard Law School, worked in a couple of major firms like, I don't know what, partner at Freshfields, or just a very good background, but he's probably in his mid-60s, maybe a little older, and he doesn't have any business and he's not employed. So my strategy for him that's working is I'm sending him to firms in smaller markets. So think, Toledo, Ohio, and Missoula, Montana, or I'm just making markets out, bigger markets than that. I don't want to give away where he's working, but that's, or Birmingham, Alabama, that's what you do. And suddenly he's employable. So something to think about. But the final thing is, in a major market, you're typically, as a corporate attorney, if you're working in a major firm, you're going to be in a subset of corporate, like corporate, whatever, M&A, securities, or something like that. If you're in a smaller market, you're more likely to be a generalist. Generalists are, for the most part, working in smaller markets like Omaha or something, are going to be much more isolated from the economy going going south. And one thing I like about smaller markets, like an example would be Omaha, is people join firms there and they often stay their entire career. Whereas if people join firms in major markets, it's very rare for them to stay their entire career. You make less money in a smaller market, but you typically have a lot more freedom in terms of your time, all the things like that. You have much more freedom, and it's much easier to stay employed and often be happier, but people don't often want to do that. I see people all the time that have worked in major firms in New York, and then we go to work in upstate and they get jobs in Syracuse, and the job in New York may have paid $500,000. The job in Syracuse might pay $150,000, but it balances out because they have a lot more free time and so forth that they can have in the smaller market as opposed to working in the major market. The next market I'm going to discuss, the next one I'm going to discuss is real estate. But I did, just as an important point, I wanted to bring up that understanding this stuff is important. It's probably some of the most important stuff you could understand in your career, both whether or not you're a partner or an associate, just because the choices you make about your practice area can have a big influence. Meaning, I talked to you about litigation, the benefit of going into consumer as opposed to business facing, the fact that it becomes extremely hard to do a lot of things in litigation. For example, in commercial litigation, it's much harder to bring in clients than it would otherwise be in, for example, in anything in corporate, for example, like corporate, all companies need corporate advice, but people get sued. They need litigators, but how do they find the litigator that they use and all that sort of stuff? So it's much more difficult when you're a corporate attorney. Not only you're bringing in corporate work, but you're advising companies and stuff all the time. When those companies get sued, of course, they ask the corporate attorney, and the corporate attorney refers someone to them. So there's just a lot to this. Corporate, the size markets you work in, the type of litigation you do, and making these decisions can make you much stronger as an attorney in terms of how do you protect your career? What do you do to get work? What is your prospects? How do you do things in the long run, depending on the practice area you choose? And honestly, if you're just in the first couple of years of practice, it's not too late if you're a litigator to switch to corporate. It's not too late if you're a corporate to switch to litigation, but you often will not work in the same quality of firms. So now I'm going to talk to you about real estate, which is another very important practice area to understand. Very important because that's especially what's happening right now to real estate attorneys. It's past several years when interest rates were very low, real estate was doing very well. And it's generally, there's a lot more going on when interest rates are low because it's less expensive for people to buy things. And it's not as active when interest rates are higher, as I'm sure you're aware, because of post-COVID and people working at home. A lot of firms do not have office space. Companies don't have office space anymore. So that has slowed down. When I started my career, I believe that real estate was just dead. The interest rates were high, were not as high as they are today, but they were high. And the market for real estate attorneys was not doing well. I would be getting phone calls constantly from real estate attorneys that didn't have jobs and were looking for positions. And many of these attorneys were desperate. They couldn't find jobs. I was talking to senior real estate attorneys, junior real estate attorneys, and because the interest rates were high, just a lot of deals weren't happening, especially in the commercial sector. And I had one attorney that he'd been unemployed for a few years and looking for a job. And when I represent someone, I work very hard. I send them to firms that have openings. If they'll let me, I send them to firms that don't have openings. And I finally was able to get in my position with a large law firm. Back then, the market rate for an attorney in his year, this was obviously years ago, was $150,000. This is when starting salaries in law firms were like 80 for the top firms. And this law firm offered him $90,000, which was for whatever, a 6 or 7 year associate. It was a complete insult. And then he might even be more senior than that, I don't remember. But when I said to the law firm, this is incredible, that's less than you pay your first year associates. And they said, we know, but actually, no, I guess the first years were making more than I don't know, maybe this 23 years ago. But I was saying, this is less you pay your first year associates. And they said it is, but we're the only job in Los Angeles, and we can pay whatever we want. They knew he'd been unemployed for 2 years. But this attorney, because he'd been unemployed for so long, was actually happy when he got the position. This firm was a when I say a major firm, it was a well-known law firm based in LA that, that this is what they did. And it's completely insulting, but this is the power that law firms can have over people. If you're in a practice area that gets very slow, it's not good. And right now we're in one of those slowdowns. The interest rates are very high. The office market is seized up. There's not a lot of deals happening, and things are very bad for real estate attorneys in the commercial sector. And even there's real estate has commercial transaction, but it also has residential transactions, and residential transactions for attorneys to do that are also frozen up because there's fewer deals because of the interest rates. So real estate, just to understand that it has what I would call a time bomb built into it. It's always going to slow down, and different things happen. Like you couldn't have predicted COVID. You couldn't have predicted very high interest rates. And when everything does slow down, it becomes very difficult for a real estate attorney. It may be a good choice going into real estate work, but at the same time, things can get very bad if you're at the wrong time. And so it cannot be good. One thing I like about real estate law, a couple of things I like about it are that real estate law will often be a practice area that you can find clients in, because there are countless contractors and real estate trusts and companies, and people doing deals. And especially in a city like Los Angeles, there's just an unbelievable amount of people doing the work. So if you are a real estate attorney, you know how to work that, you can do very well. Real estate law can be a very good market, a very good thing to go on because of that. And so it's also easy to go in-house, you get clients. So there's just a lot of good things about it. But if you are someone that wants to work for other people, the practice area can become very dangerous in different points in time. People that do well in real estate law often are able to build clients, but even when they do that, it can be difficult. If you real estate law in a smaller market, what happens is attorneys in small markets might actually do real estate and also do corporate at the same time. So real estate is a good practice area when things are going well, but typically it can often slow down. There's all sorts of work that real estate attorneys can do. They can go in-house. I've seen people go in-house and work for Aspen Mountain and doing their real estate work. There's just all sorts of kind of fun in-house jobs you get. But if you are working for other people, you need to realize that real estate is going to slow down. It's very slow right now. People are losing their jobs and having a very difficult time because of this. Is a practice area I'm just going to talk about real briefly that again may not be something everyone on this call is interested in, because there's probably not a lot of trademark attorneys, but this practice area is very interesting, does well in expanding economies. When people are starting businesses, they often need a lot of trademark work done. But when businesses aren't being started, there's not as much demand for trademark attorneys except for litigation. There are not ever a lot of large positions in large law firms. Have been a lot more recently than there's ever been. And I'm talking about people doing transactional trademark work, which is writing trademarks and doing all sorts of things. And filing trademarks. When the work stops, which it always does, when the economy slows down, it tends to mirror corporate. Trademark attorneys will lose their positions. And I've seen this happen all the time. It's a very dangerous practice area to go into if you are a junior attorney. Extremely dangerous because litigation is another type of work that sometimes trademark attorneys do, and that can actually be a decent practice area to be in, even compared to transactional trademark. And trademark work actually is even more dangerous because it doesn't require as much training as a lot of other practice areas. So a lot of firms will use paralegals or contract attorneys or staff attorneys to do the work. So it can be it's an extremely dangerous practice area to go into. And if I was a young attorney, I would probably run from this practice area unless you wanted to have your own firm that does that. And then if you wanted to ever you believe you can bring business in very quickly or something, you could do it too. But from what I've seen, most trademark attorneys, if you're junior and you don't make it past if you make it past your first 7 or 8 years and you're able to bring in clients and stuff, then you'll do well. But if you're not, can be very dangerous. The next practice here is patent prosecution. And by the way, as I'm talking about all these practice areas, I realize that you may not be a corporate attorney, you may not be a litigator, you may not be a patent prosecutor. but it is important for someone that kind of for you to understand how the market works and what practice areas should you choose? What practice areas should you avoid? If you're running a firm, like what happens to different practice areas and how does this all work? Because very few people understand this, and understanding that is going to make you a much stronger attorney even in terms of if you're trying to bring in work. Patent prosecution is a practice area where there's originally for several years, there was not much of a slowdown for prosecutors that did things that involved electrical, engineering, physics, and other hard sciences. And for the most part, over the past several years, it's remained robust. But recently, it's actually slowed down quite a bit. Patent prosecutors used to be very rare, but then what happened is an incredible number of people started going into patent prosecution because the market was so good and they knew they can make more money than being engineers. So they went to law school. So there are some traps in patent prosecution. By the way, in terms of patent prosecution, you have two types of patent prosecution. You have hard sciences patent prosecution, and then you have life sciences. There are two different types of patent prosecution. Hard sciences, which is physics, electrical engineering, and so forth, tends to do much better than life sciences, which is biology, chemistry, all those sorts of things. And with things like these hard sciences type of patent prosecution, many firms are often dependent on one client, so they will get all of their work. They might get all the work from Apple or something like that. And then if they lose the client, people can lose their jobs. Most of this hard sciences IP work occurs in the Bay Area. That's where most of the jobs are. There are firms in New York that do it now, but it's hard to be a firm in New York to do patent prosecution because the billing rates are often high, and people will, it's not worth it for clients. There's other areas where there's patent prosecution going on. There's Los Angeles, which isn't huge. I don't know that we get a lot of interviews in Los Angeles. Minneapolis has a lot of firms. Colorado has a lot of firms. Texas is actually busy, and Washington, D.C. for patent prosecution. If you're hired in a smaller market as a patent prosecution attorney, and there are places doing patent prosecution in small markets, there's small cities in Colorado, because these firms can pop up anywhere. They have a client, it doesn't matter where the attorneys are. You can get jobs in smaller markets as well. And then there's other issues with patent attorneys. If you choose to go into patent prosecution, you don't have a PhD, you're going to have a much harder time staying employed than you would if you had a PhD. So the qualifications of patent prosecutors are very important. The clients want to hire people with PhDs. They're more willing to pay high rates. And so if you choose to go into patent prosecution, don't have a PhD, you're often in trouble. So it's depending on the firm you're trying to work in. If you go into patent prosecution, it's important to understand that your qualifications, if there's people that are better than you, then they're more likely to keep their jobs. So there's that. And then just a final point about patent prosecution is that historically between 1999 to 2018, it was very busy and easy to get a job, and incredibly easy, like in 2000, like firms were begging and paying bonuses and all sorts of things. But then patent prosecution actually started in 2018. The number of openings and people getting hired has actually steadily gone down. There's just not enough work. And I think that's because there's more attorneys that went into it. And that's for the hard sciences. It's becoming much harder. It's very risky going into patent prosecution in some cases because work can slow down, but you can always go in a house. It's easy to get clients, but you know what you're doing. Life sciences is another type of patent prosecution. That includes things like biology and chemistry. That is also a dangerous practice area. People that do life sciences patent prosecution may be doing drug patents, biotech patents, but this could also slow down. There was a thing in 2015 where there were suddenly all these firms in New York that were doing life sciences patent prosecutions work. And then at the beginning of 2015, all of a sudden the work stopped and a lot of people lost their jobs. And so things can change very quickly. There's certain markets that are good for life sciences patent prosecution. A lot of it occurs in the Bay Area, and then Boston has always been a big center of it. Some very good firms there, show and other places doing it. And then San Diego can also be busy, but these areas are also vulnerable to losing work. And so there's often major clients and things can slow down. So the importance of understanding kind of the markets you can work in to understand what's going on. So things in the economy can, in terms of trends and things, can affect the jobs. Yeah. It's interesting how things work in the economy. Electrical engineers are very much in demand now because they do circuits and all that sort of thing. But when you take decades prior to that, it was mechanical engineers because people were building machines or things that was automobiles and things that was no longer, automobiles now tend to involve electrical components where everything used to be about mechanical. So it's a dangerous practice area. And if you are considering becoming a patent attorney, it can be very cliquey. I don't know why patent attorneys are very mean to each other, but they blackball each other and they do all sorts of things you don't really see. In other careers, if you are going into it, you need to be very careful because patent attorneys will do blackball people, and it can be very difficult. Many times not impossible for them to get a position where I don't know why they do this. I don't really understand it, but it occurs with a lot of frequency. So I'm just bringing that up. Okay, so we're working through these. I'm not going to be spending a ton more time before we get to Q&A because I realize it's a lot of information. But the next one is labor and employment. It is also often dependent on the economy. So when the economy is doing well, there tend to be, and there are a lot of jobs, there tends to be a lot less labor and employment work than litigation. So there's fewer people suing. Often during good economies, they're happy, they're employable. But when the economy is slow, people will look back and why they got fired. They'll come up with reasons that may be true or not. And so there's likely to be lawsuits. In strong economies, there are typically very few, less labor and employment openings. Now I'm talking about labor and employment opening defense and plaintiffs work. And a lot of times large law firms will let people go. Another point just that's important to understand about labor and employment is if you do get a job in a large law firm and you're doing advice to employers or helping with individual lawsuits and stuff, it's often the law firms aren't going to keep you around. They're more interested in people doing things like class action defense and things that they bill hours. So it's very difficult to often stay employed in large law firms. They tend to be actually more interested in shedding their employment practices than building them up because a lot of the clients don't want to do high-paying work. The work that is done in labor and employment often is not done. Large law firms do not continue doing it, and they haven't been for years. They've been shedding those practice areas. For other firms that do only employment litigation, which would be, you have very good firms like Whitler Mendelsohn, Fisher and Phillips, and Gordon Harrison, and things like that do employment litigation. That can be a very good practice area to be in if you're doing defense. Those firms tend to be very strong. They represent a lot of businesses and can do well. Then you have firms like that do plaintiffs work. So that can also be a very good practice area to be in, understanding the difference between license and defense. There are a lot of firms that do only that. The billing rate, defense firms, tends to be much lower than large law firms. So because of that, the compensation is less, but you often have a much better time staying employed. And then in terms of the plaintiff's work, that's also a very good practice area to be in. You can, just like personal injury and those sorts of things, you can often make quite a bit of money. There's other subsets of labor and employment that can be good. So there's people that do union labor side work, and that if you are at the right firm and have the right clients, that can be a good practice area as well. I have a couple more things I'm going to go into and go into all this detail. So if you are making decisions about what practice area you're in, or you want to know how things are going to be affected in the firm you go to, that can be very helpful for you to understand all this information, because there's really no one that I know of that is providing this information to people. So bankruptcy, you can pretty much get the case or the idea of how things work there. I think everybody understands that during economic expansions, when things are going well, there tend to be fewer bankruptcies. And then when there's economic slowdowns, there are more opportunities. It's always worked that way. There are always a lot of bankruptcies going on. So it does happen in good economies as well as bad economies. Things happen to businesses, business models change, and all sorts of things happen. So it can, depending on what state you're in, and what firm you're in, things can be busy or not. There's certain firms that have exceptional bankruptcy practices, while Gotcho that pretty much stays busy. There's other firms and Stang and some other very good firms that I tend to always be doing pretty well in the work, in terms of the work they bring in, and do well. There's other ones that don't. But those types of firms can do, a lot of firms can stay very busy, but there typically is not as much work during slowdowns. Firms are often firm specific. So there are sometimes firms will typically get madder and work out for a big bankruptcy for one client, then work will slow down when that's completed, and maybe they didn't hire attorneys to work on that, and attorney will need a new job. One thing that's nice about bankruptcy is there's a federal type thing. So you can move markets often very easily. The other thing about bankruptcy is that the bankruptcy attorneys tend to have a very big network with each other. If you are a bankruptcy attorney, this is one thing that can be smart for whatever practice area you're in. There's not as many of them in different markets. If you are like a bankruptcy attorney in Los Angeles or a bankruptcy attorney in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, they all know each other, so they help each other to find jobs and good networks. There's also a lot of very good boutiques for it. And then there's company-facing bankruptcy, then there's consumer bankruptcy. As a consumer bankruptcy firm, meaning you're filing kind of all these bankruptcies for different companies and individuals, you're helping them file for bankruptcy. There's a lot of work, and you can build often a big business doing that if you ever choose to go into it, open your own practice. And I just want to keep making this point because I make it at the beginning. If you go into practice areas that are representing individuals, that you get are things like bankruptcy or consumer bankruptcy, personal injury, labor and employment, plaintiff's work, trusted estate, things like that, you can often do exceptionally well by representing individuals as opposed to companies. But at the same time, large law firms will often even keep you around as a bankruptcy attorney if there's only a couple of you in office in case things pick up. So at least they have the resources. So it can be a good practice area for that reason, but it's very risky, especially if you're trying to work in large law firms, because work can be very slow. What do I mean by that? If you were trying to get a job like the big firm in Dallas, Texas, and you were searching right now, there might be nothing, or Austin, nothing. And there might be 10 of them, 10 jobs in New York. We're talking about large law firms. It can be, when you get into a practice area that's that specific, it can be extremely dangerous to be in that practice area just because there's often not enough opportunity. And when there's not, you will lose your job if you're trying to work in a large law firm. You may be able to work in a small firm or for a boutique, but it can be very scary. Tax law is another one, just all sorts of problems with tax law. Tax law at large law firms tends to support the corporate practice areas like M&A and things like that. So when the market is good, tax lawyers can do very well, but there's different things that tax law attorneys do. They often come from accounting firms. It's actually, I don't know what this says here, but it's very difficult to get jobs in large law firms if you're coming from an accounting firm trying to get a tax job. They often come from LLM programs, and sometimes when the economy is good, they're able to get their welcome because their M&A and other corporate departments are busy, and so tax law will often do very well, but it often slows down. When it slows down, it can be difficult to keep a position, and the law firms will say things like, "We never send us people from accounting firms." They'll be very hostile about it, and not nice. If you want to be a tax lawyer, you typically need to get an LLM for places like New York University that, they might like that better than Georgetown. There's a whole snobbery that goes on with that. And to want LLMs, they typically, if a law firm is hiring a tax attorney, especially large law firms, they want to hire people that are coming from other law firms. So if you get an LLM and you go to work in an accounting firm, the odds they're not zero, but they're very slim if you would ever get a position in a large law firm. So if you are watching this and you are a tax attorney or thinking about becoming a tax attorney, this could really save your career, because if you choose this practice here, it's going to be very difficult for you to get a position in a large law firm because there's just not a lot of tax jobs. For one, they're just not. There have never been a lot of tax jobs. So it's going to be very difficult for you to get a position in a large law firm. The way that most people get into large law firms as tax attorneys is they have the fortune to work in a law firm that does tax law, like a large law firm over the summer, and somehow convince the firm that they like to do tax law, and then can get positions that way. So that you need to understand how difficult it is to become a tax lawyer, the fact that you need an LLM, the fact that it's very difficult to get a tax job even with an LLM in a law firm. And so what do? Most tax attorneys will go to work in accounting firms. And sometimes once you get that experience, you can go in-house. Rarely you can get a job at a law firm. And then the other thing that happens with tax attorneys is they often will, go to work in different types of accounting firms. Sometimes tax lawyers can do things in tax controversy, which is fun, fighting for different things of controversy. They can go to work in the IRS, which is actually a very good job for a tax attorney, which is a pretty cool practice area, I think, place to work. So there's different options for tax attorneys, but if you want to work in a law firm, it can be very difficult. And then when the economy slows down, tax often slows down, or when it slows down, if you were doing like a thing like real estate or corporate, that you can move into smaller markets and play all these games to stay employed. But tax law is very difficult because when the market goes down in New York or whatever, there'll be no tax law jobs to big size law firms. It's very difficult to keep your job as a tax attorney. And even during economic recessions, there might be all the large law firms in the country, there might just be a few corporate tax openings. So it's a very risky practice area for that reason. Immigration, I'll talk a little bit about this practice area, and we're getting pretty close to the end of this presentation. I just wanted to go through a few more of these, but immigration, most large law firms don't have immigration practices. Sometimes they do. There's big law firms in Silicon Valley and so forth that have them. There's often a lot of immigration work during times when presidential administrations are bringing people in. They're not. It goes through a boom or bust cycle. Immigration could be a very good practice area if you're trying to start your own firm. And there's also lots of immigration firms, but that practice area will tend to expand and contract depending on the state of the practice area. I'm almost done with this presentation, then we'll take questions. The thing that I think is important for anyone to understand is there's practice areas that are consumer facing, and then there's practice areas where let me just get this done here, where people are representing individuals, company facing versus individual facing. So that you need to choose what road you want to go on. Do you want to represent people, or do you want to represent companies? Since there's more money, of course, when you're representing companies, but there's also more risk. And working for firms that represent companies is where most law students aspire to go. They aspire to go to big firms and big markets that pay a lot of money, but that can be a risky proposition. It can also be, from a financial standpoint, an incredible windfall where you do very well. Is that a good decision for you or not? And often it's an exceptional decision because you can do very well, especially if you're bringing clients. But you have to decide what practice area you're going to go into, and then also what type of market. And I will go over some of these practice areas during the Q&A, but you just need to understand that your choice of the practice area may have a lot to do with what happens in your legal career. You could either succeed or not. And if you are in one of these practice areas right now, it should show you the dangers that will happen depending on your choice. When actors, for a while I was involved in this acting industry in LA, I don't know what I was doing. I spent a lot of time on my hands, but I'm working very hard on that. When actors describe other actors to describe what happened to them, just say they're working. And they say they're working, it's all that needs to be said. It doesn't matter where they're working. It could be a small play or a big movie or something, or internet television series. But for the most part, when they say that, all that matters whether or not the person is working. And one thing I would say to you, and this is the best advice I can possibly give anyone at this stage of your career, no matter who you are, no matter your seniority level. I mean, I was talking to an attorney the other day who was mid-60s, and he was complaining about some firm that he was interviewing with, was unemployed. And when your job as an attorney is your number one job, the most important thing you can possibly do is to stay employed. And it doesn't matter how much the firm is paying. It matters whether or not you're working. And you need to be working. You need to be in a practice area where you feel like you can be working. You need to be in a firm that you feel like is going to support you with work. And you need to take steps to make sure you always have access to work. Because if you don't have access to work, people aren't giving you work, then you're dead in the water. And so you need to make decisions about this. Are you in a place where you can get work? Will you have the ability to get work? Does your practice area allow you to always get work? And I had so many stories I could tell, but I have this one of them I'm friends with, and she went to Southwestern Law School after a career in fashion industry. So she'd been doing that, and she put herself through and came out with over $100,000 in loans and couldn't get any interviews, didn't have great grades. No one was interested in talking to her, and she didn't know what she's going to do. So she decided to hang on a shingle and with no resources or really anything, and start this immigration law firm just thinking that's what she'd do. It's interesting. She was from another country and could come over and had to get papers and everything. I thought it was difficult. She was interested in doing that. And so she built it up, and now with the person, 20 attorney law firm doing millions of dollars in revenue a year. She's very successful. So you have to just put yourself in a position where you are able to get work. You always want to get work, whether it's on your own or whatever, and choose a practice area where you're able to stay employed. It's extremely important. And you need to choose if you're consumer facing or if you're company facing or what you do, because the biggest mistake that I see a lot of attorneys do is they put all their hopes into working in a large law firm, and then it becomes possible for them to rise, or they rise and they can't stay there, or they rise and they stay there, and awesome careers I think can happen. But if you want to stay employed in a law firm, regardless of the size, you need to stay on top of your game. Just realize there's a lot of pressure from people to take their jobs away. One other thing I wanted to bring up to your attention, and this is very important. So look at the job listings on BCG, or look at the job listings on Law Crossing or Indeed or LinkedIn, just for attorneys. And in law firms, and you will always see, they will say, we're looking for a junior person with 1 year of experience, or 1 to 2 years old. They'll say, we're looking for someone with 3 to 5 years of experience. But they'll rarely say, we're looking for someone with 10 plus years of experience. We're looking for someone with 5 plus years of experience. So what did that mean? That means that they want to hire people at all these practice areas and these large law firms and mid-sized law firms. They want to hire people that are younger and that are hungrier. And then they want them to put these young people to put all their heart and soul into a job for a few years. And then basically they exhaust, that person leaves, and they bring in someone else who's putting all their heart and soul into it. It's sad. It's not one law firm, most law firms. They're not all law firms, but that's how it works. Think about it. You're a business. You bring in people that are incredibly enthusiastic and doing everything they possibly can and are bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and then pretty soon they get jaded and then they leave. But the people that can rise above that and become part of it, that's what happens. I just want you to understand, because it's so important, that when you go to work in a practice area in a different type of law firm, you need to look out for your future, and you need to choose a practice area that's going to give you a future. And you need to decide, do you want to try to represent companies, which is a very good thing to do, but or do you want to, what do you want to do? What is your goal? Where do you foresee yourself being able to stay employed and continue working? Because if law firms are all asking for 3 to 5, or maybe 5 to 7, very rarely, so that should tell you something. That should tell you that everybody wants people that are young, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and then they don't want them after that. So I was talking to a law firm the other day, and this was actually a small law firm, and I couldn't believe it. Like, I was this law firm, and again, this is the way law firms think. I'm not criticizing it. It's just how the business works, and it's always worked that way. I was talking to this law firm, and he said, no, I don't want people that are senior. They're going to expect more money. They're going to hurt the morale. The younger person, they're not a good example because they don't have business. They're often going to be angry, and because they feel that they're not getting what, they didn't make partners. They're angry. They're defensive. They're just all these, they don't work as hard. They're drained on the enthusiasm of younger people, saying all these things. And so and this is a small firm, and it was 10 people. And so just remember that it's very difficult depending on the practice area you choose. And you need to, if you want to stay employed in large law firms or mid-sized law firms, you need to be someone that's working and you need to have access to work. And so you go to a firm where you're always going to have access to work, where people are going to protect you, where you're comfortable and where you believe in your practice area that you can succeed and do well. If you're a practice area and you want to stay employed there, let's say, this is hypothetically, if you become a trademark attorney, you should get talks, you should write papers, you should get involved in associations, you should look like the best trademark attorney there is, and you should be all over it, and then try to get clients and everything and really stick out, because if you don't, you're not going to have a job. And people come out of school all the time, and I'm sorry for venting here, but I think it's very important to understand. People come out of school all the time, and they think that they're the gift of the law firm needs to impress them, and if they don't like the culture or anything of the law firm, they're going to leave, and they're entitled to do and act and behave whatever. The law firm owes them something because they went to a great law school and so forth. So none of that matters. You have, depending on the practice area you choose, you have a limited amount of time to really get ahead. And if you don't, you're in trouble. At least you're not going to stay employed. And important point to understand. One other point about practice areas is you are much more likely to stay employed if you are in if you're in a practice area that you're comfortable with and you feel like you can do well with over time. Yes. So that's something you're very interested in. You can see yourself doing better than anyone out there. And if you're like that, you're going to do very well, but you need to be that. And if you're in a practice area that you currently like, you're in a good shape. And one of the things I would also say is being on these webinars is like one of the smartest things you can do for your career. I get emails every week from people that have said that learning the stuff they have on these webinars has changed their careers. And I don't think it's because it's sort of exceptional gurus. It's because I understand this information. Most people don't bother to talk about it. So I believe that it's helpful that people learn this. Okay, this is fun. This person says, I'm glad this is probably a regular on this webinar. So you occasionally mentioned a candidate, actually I have, who applied to or was rejected from medical school while finding between jobs. This happened to me as well. Is this specific to medicine, or is there something about attorneys that makes it difficult to start a career in any field? Yeah, so with the medical field, typically, if you're going to be serving patients and committed to that, I think I've actually seen this with a couple different attorneys, and I saw the opposite happen. I saw this one attorney was crazy. He was like the dean of the medical school, like a big one. I don't know, it was in Texas or Oklahoma or Mississippi, I don't know, Missouri. I don't remember where it was, but he was like the dean of the medical school, and he went back to law school because he wanted to be a lawyer. I think his wife is a lawyer, and he had an incredibly difficult time in getting positions in the legal field. And I think he actually struck out. He just couldn't stay employed anymore. But people that try to go back for people that go to law school and they want to come back and be doctors, I don't know why, but I've seen this on more than one occasion. I think it doesn't work out because I think that the medical schools want people who want nothing more than to be a doctor. And if they've taken another path in their career, then they're probably not going to be a good fit. So I think it's like that. I had an interesting thing happen. I was in part of this group and we got access. They had to give background checks and everything. We went to the Navy SEALs thing, Navy SEALs training center and so forth. And there's one in San Diego, outside of San Diego. So we went there and had a presentation, and then they gave us a tour around the complex where the Navy SEALs train. But what happens when people join the Navy SEALs is I don't know, they might get 5,000 applications. I'm just making these numbers up, but I'm making the initial ones up, but they might get 5,000 applications, and then they give the 5,000 people a review, and I don't know, and then they reject a bunch of them. I don't know how, but then they might get the number down to 800, and they give those 800 psychological tests and different types of tests, and they eliminate, and then maybe they have a training class of 300 people. Now, the 300 people I'm positive about. I don't know these numbers, 5,000 and so forth, like how many of those get I'm not really quite sure how that works, but they get down to a number around 300, and then they take them on all these things, like they go they have this thing called Hell Week where they start on Sunday night, they're done Thursday night. And they might, after that, the 300 people might be whittled down to 30 or something, or 40 people that make it through that. It might even be lower. And the ones that don't make it, so you have these 300 people in a class, and you have 260 or whatever, 70 that didn't make it. They don't get good jobs in the Navy after that. They do things like scraping paint on ships. And that's the people that don't succeed in one career. I think, especially something like medicine, like that's a huge risk, taking someone who's second chance or second choice is to become a doctor. Like it's just, it doesn't work. I don't know. But if you were medical school, you'd want to admit people that never had, that's all they wanted to do. And they always wanted to do that as opposed to someone who doesn't. So I think that's part of it. Their heart's not in it. I've seen in any profession, in my profession, like recruiting, I've seen so many people come into this whose heart wasn't in it. And then they fail. So your heart has to be in whatever you do. And if it's not in law, a lot of people sometimes will go to business school, and sometimes that works out, or they'll become writers, or they'll do all sorts of things. But it can be, if your first choice is not to be a doctor, then you're probably not going to work out. People aren't fit for some careers. People aren't fit for some practice areas. And there's nothing wrong with that. The guy that wanted to become a lawyer because his wife is a lawyer, and that didn't work out for him, that's perfectly understandable. Like, why would it work out for someone to do something different like that if that wasn't their first choice? So if you become a doctor and then you become dean of a medical school and you decide to go to law school, that doesn't make any sense. When you've risen to the highest levels of being, why would you do something but you're not a good fit for? So this is very interesting, right? Yeah. So, okay, let's see. And these are great questions, by the way. Thank you for everyone who's asking them. And also thank you for, I know there's 400 people in this webinar, but to listen to this information, we're just amazed, because I think it's a lot to learn. And to be a student at law firms, if you're going to be working in them or working in them, is the smartest freaking thing you can do. I can't even imagine. I'm very impressed for people that are watching this and listening, because I think that a lot of this information compared to the normal webinars I do is, if it's practice area specific, you may not get as much out of it, but I think the overall global talk that I've gone into can be very helpful. Okay, at smaller firms, the impact of a practice area collapse can be particularly devastating. What advice do you have for boutique firms that can diversify their services and expand into more resilient practice areas? So a lot of firms, that's a good question. So a lot of firms are boutique firms, meaning they do different types of things, like different types of, for example, you have firms that, I've seen firms, I was talking to one the other day whose specialty was white collar litigation. So they would represent, the firm was founded by like a U.S. attorney or someone, and then he'd hired some people, but then there were slowdown. And so he had this website, he was talking about his website, and he said, what do I do? Because the only way I can get through these bad economic conditions is by doing plaintiffs related work and then settling those cases and or filing lawsuits. And so that's what we do. But how do I put that on my law firm website without turning away clients that are trying to want to be represented by collar litigation? A smaller law firm, that in patent, you see it in a lot of smaller law firms that only do one form of litigation. Some of them only do real estate. Some of them only do corporate related work. And the other problem that is, if you're a boutique, you get a reputation for being a specialist. Your firm deals in a certain practice area. And so that practice area slows down, like your bankruptcy or other types of practices, that can be very difficult. So what do law firms do? They figure out ways to expand their existing client base, meaning bring in more clients by trying to go out further in the market, or they sometimes will go into different practice areas that can be better. So what does that mean? That means like a real estate firm could also start doing real estate litigation or different types of things. But yeah, it can be very bad at smaller firms, when a law firm is on doing one practice area. So my suggestion is always to try to expand the practice area to something else. And so what have I seen law firms do? I've seen like law firms that do like only corporate, and there's not a ton of these, but law firms that do only corporate will start doing, if they specialize some type of corporate. In a big city, they may start doing general corporate, meaning helping law firms, their clients with bylaws, registrations, minutes, and putting together things for them for that. Law firms, employment litigation, they could go and do the same thing, doing handbooks and just different things like that. So those are things that I've seen law firms do, but it's always important to have different types of clients. So if I was a law firm, I would have large institutional clients, but then I would also always try to make sure that I have a backup of either smaller clients or different aspects of that practice area to do it, and getting different types of work out of their existing clients. So it's a very good point. And one of the things about boutique firms is they are at risk when things slow down. I've seen a lot of them go out of business, and one of the benefits of having a full service firm is that you're balancing out economic climates and things by based on having people doing different types of practice areas that may be up or down, and then having certain attorneys in the firm bringing in more business while others are bringing in less. It's very helpful to be able to have, these are, by the way, everyone, amazing questions people are asking, very good questions, but thank you. It's very helpful to other people too. Yeah, I've seen firsthand how economic fluctuations can impact the demand for legal services, particularly when in real estate law. How do cyclical practice downturns tie to the concept of practice here is self-destructive? What practices, strategies can attorneys employ up to safeguard their careers during these periods of instability? The couple of things that, what are the ultimate solution? What do you do? So and what would I do? What would Harrison do? What would Harrison do based on what I know? I would like to start there's that on a business. Need to get close to, this is very helpful advice. Watching this is very helpful to have learned to attorneys, lots of this. There are certain people out there, people that have to get work. That's just what they do. They generate work. They figure out things to be done. How do they do it? It's something that they learn. It's a skill. And there are people out there that know how to generate work. They just have that skill. It's just what it is. It's like that in every profession, like that with real estate, like that with whatever. But there's certain people that know how to get work. Those are people you need to get close to. There's also outside companies who can always give you work. What do you do? If you're an attorney, you get close and you figure out early or as soon as possible. What does that mean? So when I talk to attorneys do a lot of business all the time. And one of the things they always say is they say that I always try to reach out to people that I know have work or will have work. I help them through good times and bad times, whatever. And sometimes the general counsel may lose their job and they may need someone else that can help them, or that all sorts of things can happen. But your goal as an attorney, regardless of the status of your career, is to find outside companies and people who can give you work. You need to get close to them. If you don't know how to do it, you need to watch what other people do. So these are things you can get close to people with lots of business in your own firm. If you do get close to them, you should get all the frickin' work you can from them and do everything you possibly can. And then there's always going to be outside companies and people who can give you work. So you need to do the same thing. You need to try to get close to those people as early as possible in your career. The other thing is you need to understand market where there's a lot of work. But regardless of, say you're in real estate, there's always going to be boom markets. There's always boom market. New market, regardless of the state of the economy. So what does that mean? So that means that you can go, for example, right now, real estate's very slow in Los Angeles, New York, but it's very active in Charlotte. In North Carolina, there's a ton of work. In other recessions, it's been very busy in Austin, Texas, like a couple of years ago. And then prior to that, it was very busy in South Florida. So there's always where you need the bar window. You can't just move to South Florida to practice law, but because it's one of the states, so you take the bar. The point is that there's always going to be markets where there's a lot of work. So if I was an attorney looking for a job in real estate right now, I would go on BCG or whatever, Indeed, Law Crossing, then just look and see where all the real estate jobs are. And there's always going to be pockets of work in different places. I've seen one of my first placements was attorneys moving from a small firm in Boise, Idaho, one of my first real estate placements several years after. But there's just a big demand in Los Angeles. There's always going to be markets where there's not enough attorneys for real estate law and more demand. But what you would need to do with any practice area you're in, every practice area, by the way, there's going to be certain parts of the country that are busier than others. An example would be the corporate crisis when all the people were losing their jobs. What happened then is, it's interesting, all the activity of all the jobs and things there was a ton of jobs in Texas because they were insulated from the economic downturn by all this activity going on in oil and gas. Same thing happened in North Dakota. There was this incredible boom for trust and estates attorneys and all this stuff. And anybody could get a job there. So it just literally was that good. So it just might have been much, you're an attorney and had good experience. But the point is that you just always need to look for markets that are good. There's always going to be, especially real estate, there's always going to be markets that are good for your practice area. It's just how it is. There's going to be, real estate might be hot in Detroit right now. Detroit was like a freaking nightmare and now there's all this activity and I'm getting bidding wars for attorneys. But it all depends on the practice area that you want to be in, whatever it is. And there's always going to be markets. But if you are young, you need to get very close to attorneys with lots of business because they can protect you and they will always figure out how to get work. That's what they do. There are people that literally your job as an attorney is to get work. You need to figure out how to get your work from your partners you're working with. But you also need to figure out how to get work from outside people. That's your job. Your job as an attorney is nothing more than to get work. And then you do the work, but you need to bring in the work. And that's what makes people successful, having access to work. So you can get it outside or you can get it, you can find markets where there are a lot of work. And by the way, there's always markets where there's a lot of work. So one thing that happens in a lot of economic downturns is people are really trying to look for corporate jobs. And they're like, there's no corporate job. What do I do? You can always potentially get positions at corporate if you look at jobs outside of major cities, because there are places that are insulated for whatever reason. They might have a little ecosystem and there might be, I don't know, in Reno, Nevada, there might be casinos and different agricultural companies from, I don't know, but there could be corporate jobs there. So you just need to understand the market. And it's always helpful when you do that. Let's see. Sorry, give me a second to answer this question. Okay, so the person says, and this is another thing that you don't really need to worry about. I once experienced a setback in a high-profile case that significantly impacted my professional standing within the legal community. How can I bounce back from such setbacks and rebuild my career momentum? Okay, so this is a great question. What do? You just stop worrying about it. But that's like, stop worrying about it and take control of your career. So fine. You did something wrong, but you did something wrong, you lost the case, lost the case, got trouble with the law, I don't know, with the law. I'm just making things up with the law. These are not things that you did or a drug, I'm making things up. But these are all things that lost the case, you're a horrible, got in trouble with the law, you're a drug. I'm just making stupid stuff up. But whatever, case through something, are within the data. So what do you do? So the dumbest, stupidest thing you can do, you may be, I don't know who you are, but you may be some very famous attorney was, and everyone knew that you did something wrong or you made a mistake. So why are you still trying to work with people that don't like you? Or people where they're going to hold you back or they're going to always have bad opinions of you? I saw this one guy. It's interesting. I don't want to get sued, so I'll be very careful here with what I say. But there was this very well-known attorney in Los Angeles named Kirsten. He had a firm called O'Donnell and Schaefer, and this firm had a very good reputation. They had their own courtroom, trial lawyers, and all this stuff, and very good attorneys who went there and partners. And then he did something stupid, like he asking people to make donations to politicians. Basically, there was a limit in how much, again, I don't want to get sued, so just keep in mind that I'm remembering this briefly, but he did something like, I don't know, the accusation was that he was having people give money on his behalf, even though he had maxed out his campaign contributions, just something stupid that I don't think found him very bad. But anyway, I guess that was a felony, giving people money to give to politicians on, even though you were the one giving it, you're already given, I don't know, something, but it was a felony. And they came after him with felony, trying to convict him of a felony. And I think he'd heard Jones Day and they were fighting. And the whole issue was it was convicted of a felony, and then he would lose his law license. So he was fighting, and it was all in the papers and everything. And then eventually they got the state or the government to agree to a what do you call it, misdemeanor to the felony, and they fought about this for years, and he finally got that. So then he got a job, and he decided to go to work, or the job he got was with a mid-sized LA-based firm, I think it's Greenberg Lusker, as of counsel or something. So here's this illustrious attorney, made some stupid mistake that, again, not like he was hurting people, it didn't sound, but anyway, made a stupid mistake, was all up in the news. And suddenly he decides to go back and try to be of counsel with this mid-sized LA-based firm after being at the heights of the legal crush. And then so why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because if I just hit him, I probably would have not gone back to a law firm as a counsel when I was this big famous attorney. I think I probably would have just gone back and started my own law firm and sued people, gone into mass torts or something, or done something where it doesn't matter. Like, why would I keep trying to be a defense attorney and, and having been held back and having this role as a counsel and just not well known? And I would try to stand up for myself and go and just fight and fight in a way that doesn't matter what happened. Why would you want to be part of the defense bar or whatever if you were this horrible stain in your record or whatever? I would rather go in and be like, if I was be a plaintiff's attorney and just light the world on fire and just, take all my skills of being a defense attorney. I just sue people, just be angry and whatever. That's what I would do. And that's how you get your career momentum. I've seen all these people do stupid stuff. Like, again, they make horrible error. They are busted in some prostitutions, I don't know. They'd become a drug addict. I saw one woman seen a couple women become drug addicts. I've seen one become a drunk. It was very interesting. There was one woman that I met earlier in my career, and I was actually thinking about her the other day. And she was one of my first placements, and she went to Harvard Law School, and she got a job, I believe. She worked as like a professor, got some position there teaching for a year after graduating law school. Very smart girl. And then I got her a job, I think, at Skadden, and she had been a former drug addict and had overcome this when she was younger, and had also been a model and all these things. But anyway, so she came and she moved to LA when she was moved to LA, and then she came to take the bar for going there. And I remember I took her out to dinner and had someone drive her and pick her up from bars. There used to be very close my candidates back then. But anyway, she got to a firm and started getting back into crystal meth from the front or whatever she'd been doing before. The pressure of practicing law and everything just became very hard for her, the hours. And so she started crystal meth. And then the firm, I don't know, somehow pushed her out or she left, or I don't know what happened. And she went down this addiction hole, and it just kept going. And so I think she wound up in Idaho. She was just a couple of years, just nothing happening. And obviously in the state she was in, there was no way she was going to be able to get a job or anything. And certainly her large law firm career had taken a real bad spin. What ended up happening when she was in her drugs and everything, she was associating with really bad people. She was literally, I think, living on the streets of Los Angeles, or the homeless, criminals, and all this horrible experience. This is a true story. And wow, she came to my office once and she was bare feet and living on the street with this woman and tried to get me to cash a check or something. What's the point of all this? So this woman fell to the absolute depths of, you can't make up how far this woman fell. I can't even believe it. Like Harvard, Skadden, and all this stuff. And then years of just horrible people and anyway. And so what's the point of all this? So she now, after destroying her career for several years, took all that energy and things that she learned and became a criminal attorney, like representing criminals. And she obviously got off this drug and turned her life around. And I don't know how she did it. I'm sure she spent months, if not longer, in a rehab and halfway houses. I don't know. I don't have any contact with her. But the point is that she just went to the absolute bottom of the barrel. There's things you can't even imagine. Imagine walking around barefoot in the streets of Los Angeles doing drugs. And she was with this one woman when she came into my office that had missing teeth. It was crazy. Had some kind of seed thing growing on her leg. This is a true story. I can't even believe I'm telling this story. I don't think I've ever told it. But the point, and felt like I was close to her. I may have spent a lot of time with her. I liked her a lot as a person. The point is that, so she became this very known, now she's in the city of California. I'm not going to say where it is to give away her identity, but she's got this firm, or she's got 5 or 6 criminal attorneys working for her. She does like murder trials, like this big stuff. She's very well known. She billboards. And so she turned her entire life around. And when she cleaned up, and I don't know how she got into criminal law. This is 22 years ago or whenever, when 23 or 24 years ago, when all this happened. But I guess my point is that regardless of what happens to you, you need to go into a practice area with people that will accept you. So why would you try to go into something like this Pierce O'Donnell did and keep doing the same thing and constantly have a cloud over your head and be reminded of your failure? Why would you do that? Why would you do something like that? And why would you, if you were this woman that became a drug addict and a couple of years smoking crystal meth on the streets of LA and God knows what else, prostitution, who knows? Why would you try to go back into a large law firm after all that and have this cloud hanging over your head? Why wouldn't you go and learn from your lesson? So that's the point. Things happen that are bad to all attorneys. I can tell you countless stories of people that had these careers and things happen to them. And when they had felt so far and then they came back. I've seen so many people do that. I had one guy that worked for me. He was a very well-known, I'll say his name. His name was Brian Siegel. He worked for me for over 20 years. And when he was younger, he wrote these Siegel law outlines, which used to be, they were there in my law school when I was practicing. And when I was a law student, you could buy them. And then in addition to that, he also was teaching bar classes for the Baby Bar and everything in LA. He had a big business doing that. And then he got caught taking the bar exam for someone to help them. I guess they paid him or something. And they threatened, he was charged with pending to take away his license. And I'm sure he resigned from the bar. And he basically felt like he lost. Didn't know what he was going to do. And he actually felt very badly and he became an Orthodox Jew. I think he was just a normal Jew, but Orthodox means he was wearing a kippah, praying 3 times a day with other people and completely different life. But in addition to that, he didn't know what to do, became a legal recruiter and was very successful. He worked on his own for years and then he came to work for me and worked for me for 20 years and had a very good career, just did something different, where he didn't try to go back into the legal community, working as a paralegal, and he just something different. My point to you is that whatever happens negative to you, or even if you lost your bar license or whatever, you need to go into something where you'll be welcome as opposed to the opposite. Why would you want to do something where you're continually reminded of your faults? You can move states, you can do all sorts of things to bounce back, but you don't want to be around people that are going to constantly remind you. You need to pick yourself up and figure it out. And again, I'm giving you a very long answer to this question. The reason I'm doing so is because I've seen this happen so many times. I'm telling you that you can overcome it. It's very easy. I'll tell you one other story. One of my first placements was this guy that used to be advertised, this was almost before the internet. Put advertisements, legal publications and things. If I put this out, advertisement, legal publication, I don't know why I said it. I don't even know. I was starting out as a recruiter. I really hadn't even for me placement show, but I decided to put this advertisement in this publication. And in the publication, I said, hey, I specialize in helping older attorneys transition, find jobs in new law firms without business or something. I don't know why I said it. It's almost like it came from God or something. Literally, there was no reason for me to say that. But all of a sudden, like all these attorneys were seeking me out. And one of the first attorneys that came to me, I was living in Pasadena, California, and this guy called me. He wanted to meet, and he told me that he'd been head of a practice group of corporate or something at this big law firm, or corporate securities, this big law firm, Buchalter, which in the 1980s was this incredible firm, and I don't know how long he did it. And then I met him, and I met him in a restaurant in Pasadena. He came in and told me how he used to have a big house and all this stuff. And then he was like biting his lip, so it was bleeding. And he hadn't been employed in 3 or 4 years, and had been unemployed, and he lost everything. And what had happened is he'd been a partner at this law firm, and then he'd become a commissioner at the SEC, which I guess is a big deal. And then he was carrying out lives with his wife and kids in Los Angeles. And then he was also living in Washington, D.C. as a commissioner. Everything was going well. I don't know. I heard some rumors, I don't know if it's true or not, that he was a cocaine addict or something. Again, I don't want to get sued because I'm not saying this person's name or anything, but that's what I heard. Maybe, I don't know, he told me, but something came to my attention somehow. And so anyways, he met me, and he's biting his lip, nervous, he was like shaking. And obviously the shaking was from the stress. It wasn't nothing wrong with it. And anyways, and so what happened is it came out when he was working as a commissioner that he was actually married. He married some other woman in Washington, D.C., married her while he was married to his wife in Los Angeles. And 25 years ago, I don't know how that would be considered now, but 25 years ago, that was pretty amazing. And of course, all these news stories jumped out. He lost his job and became an absolute pariah, meaning no one would have anything to do with this guy. It's just done. Both his wives, of course, divorced him. He had to give away all his money to, I don't know, his wife. I don't know what happened. And it was just a very bad situation for him. And because of that, he'd been unemployed for 4 years, but he read this advertisement. And I said, hey, I hope we're attorneys. Again, it must have been planned by God or something. I don't know why I said it, because at that point I didn't really have to. It was crazy. Why would I say that? But I said it. So he found me, and I told him I'd do what I could. And so I used to subscribe to all these legal publications. And this is before people were putting stuff online. That's how long I would do this. And so I would read them to figure out what's going on. And then one day it was in 2000 or whenever, I read this article where this law firm was saying, never in my entire 30-year career have I seen so much securities work coming across my desk. It's more than any man or even small firm could handle. It's an avalanche of work. We don't know what to do, something like that. And the law firm was in Silicon Valley. And so I was like, yeah, send this guy there. And sure enough, they were like, hell yeah. They saw his resume because he'd been a partner and a commissioner. They brought him up and hired him right away. And anyway, and then the law firm had never had anybody from a recruiter. They hired him, and he started, did we pay you? What did we do? And they had no idea. And anyway, so I got him this job, and then that particular law firm, then within a year, because they had so much work, merged into a giant law firm. And the law firm was the DLA Piper, something like that. It wasn't DLA Piper, but it was a big firm. I don't remember the name of it, but it was a major international law firm. So all of a sudden, this guy is a partner again in a major U.S. law firm, just from the luck of finding this recruiter from the stroke of who knows where, wrote this stuff in this ad. And he became a partner. And so his whole career turned around, and he bounced back and came back. Or so anybody can bounce back from any of this stuff. Keep telling stories. I had another guy that went to he was a head of a practice group of a major U.S. law firm, and they asked him to come in and help someone with a pitch in another city. So he flew from Chicago to, I don't know where it was, Minneapolis or something, and he had a drinking problem, so he drank on the plane, and he showed up at a meeting in this firm to help this person pitch a client, and was just like incredibly drunk, like very unprofessional, spot my creditors. They fired him. Just boom, like his career just stopped. So they fired him. So he came to me and asked me to help find him a job. And I did. I was able to get him into a smaller firm in their corporate practice area. And he went there and he worked there for 2 or 3 years doing the work. And he'd gotten sober by that time and spent a year getting sober. And then that firm moved into a larger firm. All this stuff is over, you can overcome it all. But I've given a very long answer to this question, but it's a very important question because a lot of people, they think their careers are over when these horrible things happen to them. And you can always overcome that is my point. It's always fixable. And so you can always fix it. No matter what happens to you or what stage in your career, you can fix it. So that's a very long answer to your question. But I wanted to give you a long answer because I've helped so many people in your position, and I just know that there's always hope, no matter how bad things are. You can always overcome them. And I could tell stories all day about this. Okay, somebody who's just starting out in the legal field, I'm curious how I can anticipate and adapt to the inevitable changes in practice areas of limited firms. How can I future-proof my career and ensure I'm not less family in certain areas become less lucrative? So it's not that practice areas become less lucrative. It's just that opportunities dry up. So there's just less work. So that's what happens. There's less work when you go into that. So you need to make choices about where you're working and how you're working. So this is really my piece of advice to everyone to that particular question you asked from how you can anticipate and adapt and so forth. So the best way to do that is to get close to partners with a lot of work. So you need to do that. You need to, this is later in your career, but when you're young, or you're starting out, you need to do your best to get close to associate partners with a lot of business. The other thing I would recommend too, everyone has, and this is actually a very important point to make. So everyone has interest and strength. So like, I'll just tell you an example. My daughter. So my oldest daughter is like taking all these APs, and for whatever reason, she's interested in, or she's interested in, but she's interested in things that don't have anything to do with English and history, but she's taking 5 in her AP history, got 5 in English, got 750 or whatever on the SVTs from English. I don't know what these, but the point is very good, but then maybe doing something else, I don't know, but I'm just giving a point. So a lot of times people have interest and want to feel that they're very strong in one field. So you should go into a practice area where you should choose a practice area that you have a lot better. That you have a passion, but you don't want to have passion for something. You need to feel like you could talk about it. You're excited about it. You love it. You would get up early in the morning to do it. You would everything about that practice area just makes you excited. And that's what you need to do. You need to go into something like that, because if you do, then you're likely to always be employed, because people will pick up on your passion. Clients will pick up on your passion. The people you work with will pick up on your passion. You can do, what do? You can write articles about it, or you can give talks about it. You can read about it in your free time, or you can just all sorts of stuff. This is what people do when they're enthusiastic about something. So you need to do something that you feel very excited about, because if you do, it's going to come across to firms you talk to. It's going to come across to you're looking for a job. It's going to come across to in a job. It's going to make it very hard for you to let go, and people are going to pick up on that. Let me just, this is a good question here. Thank you for this question, by the way. There's a lot to it. This is a good question. And by the way, this is the last question I have. If anybody has any other questions, I'll let you know. Another excellent wellness service if you're here and there. Yeah, and I'm glad that people are interested in this. It's just not normal. It's not a normal type webinar. This is meant to be inspirational, which I like to do those kind of webinars. Okay, any overview comments on the energy law practice area, e.g. regulatory work to flood poops and never seen an oil and gas transaction for renewable energy problems. I'm trying to lift. Okay, so I'm a recruiter, and I can tell you that I've been, again, doing this for decades. I'm always very worried about the energy law practice area. I think that there are pockets of activity, Colorado in oil and gas, and different areas of the country, Texas from time to time. But I'm worried about this practice area. I think I do believe it is a boom and bust type practice area. I see a lot of attorneys not being able to hold on to jobs. in this practice area. In terms of opportunities, I've seen them, but there's just the demand for this people in this practice area just isn't as strong as a lot of the normal practice areas. It's an example of a niche practice area that can sometimes be very difficult to stay employed in. It's just what it is. Sometimes there's like these practice areas that are very sexy that people want to go into, like data privacy, different types of, it used to be environmental. Now it's, this practice area. I worry a lot of times about these very specific practice areas in terms of if you're working for others, like meaning if you're working for other people, these can be very difficult practice areas. But if you're able to work in this practice area and figure out how to get clients and bring clients in, then that's actually an excellent practice area. So if you can stay employed in oil and gas or energy, typically people will do one or the other. They will do either energy, or they will do oil and gas, or they will do renewables. So it can be, I think it's a very risky practice area. I think that there's a lot of attorneys that do it that are able to bring in business, but it's very difficult for this practice area, for the most part, to support a lot of sport associates. It's just a hard practice area. And I'm just saying this from the standpoint of being a recruiter and what I see, and I see far fewer placements and other activity in that practice area than a lot of others. Okay, the next question is, would you have any overview comments on environmental land use law practice, often combined parallel to real estate law practice? I concentrate my legal career in my areas and thinking about going solo in one of our areas. Yeah, so that's a good question. And yes, land use is a very good practice area. And I think that the thing about land use is that it's very closely related to real estate. And so real estate there's always something going on in real estate, whether or not it's regardless. And there's always something going on in land use. There's always different things being built and dug up and things. And so there's always land use work. There's a lot more, being a land use attorney is much more, it's a better practice area to be in than environmental is a very difficult practice area. Environmental law will have boom and bust depending on literally like the presidential administration. If you're in Democratic, you're going to have less work than more work. Probably, I don't know, but you're going to have more or less work depending on whether it's a Republican administration or a Democratic administration. So obviously the Republican administration, you'll have more, and less when it's the Democrat, and everything on that. So that can be a little bit dangerous, but land use is a very good practice area. I place attorneys doing land use all the time, and there's jobs all the time for land use attorneys. So it can be a very good practice area. In terms of going solo in one of those areas, I would recommend being very careful. If I was thinking about going solo in one of those areas, those are not necessarily the best practice areas to go in. If you're doing land use also, you can do land use for municipalities, you can do it from. But if you want to do land use, the people that hire land use attorneys are going to want to use law firms. You're not going to want to use an individual. People that do oil and gas transactions are going to want to use a law firm, not individuals. These are, anytime you're working in a practice area where you're representing governments or oil companies or things like that, they're not going to hire a freaking, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be rude, but they're not going to be hiring solo practitioners. Would you hire a solo practitioner if you were a large company or a municipality or state energy company? No, they wouldn't. So you need to be very careful. Anybody that wants to go solo, you need to make sure that you understand that there's two types of attorneys. There's attorneys that do corporate company facing work, meaning they're representing companies, and there's attorneys that do individuals. So if you want to represent companies, you're going to need to have, in the most case, people behind you. You're going to need to have a team, because that's what they expect. And then not only that, but most companies are going to expect a brand, but they want a brand firm. They're going to pay more for Oric Cyclical, which is a great firm. They pay more for Oric than they're going to pay for a smaller firm. And Oric is a big brand name, and they want that, and that looks good to their clients and the people that the company is, coming up against. Then a solo practitioner. If you hire a solo practitioner, they'll lie. They lie, but they'll look stupid. So you have to understand, you have to choose your practice areas based on you choose your practice areas based on who you're going to represent. So you want to represent individuals, they don't know the difference between you and a law firm. They're fine. They just know you're a lawyer. You want to represent companies, you're going to need to, sometimes companies will hire patent attorneys that they know to write patents, because it's just an intellectual skill and it doesn't matter what the law firm is to going patent and trademark office. But with other practice areas, you just need to be very careful because no one is going to want to have an individual represent them in a different, you wouldn't either. Let me see. Okay, so let's see this question. I'm glad everyone's getting so much out of these webinars. Thank you for, these are very helpful. Let's see. Thank you for another informative transfer webinar. It's really priceless. The question is, thank you. It said, so many of these practices are fluid and risky. Plan-wise, does a student or new attorney hedge their bets? Is joining a firm with a tactical practice there is a good edge. So let's see. Let's see this. Personal injury seems to be a solid practice area. Let's see what this. Now, this is fun. This may be a website that I'm not familiar with. If it is, I'm pretty excited right now. Yeah, these are different practices. I see. Oh, that's fun. Let's work in there. Federal international security brands. I'm not sure what this question is. Let's see here, but these are the bunch of practice areas, which I like seeing. Federal practice with careers. I was hearing about this. Okay, back to the law firm. Okay, I guess this is doesn't sound like a law firm, but okay, so this firm has diverse practice areas, is what you're saying. I guess that's interesting. They do all these different things. I'm not sure how that's possible, just how many people they have. No, attorneys. Okay, it looks like they have quite a few people there. So your question is that is it possible as PI's revenue generates, but still take on other types of cases? What happens so this firm looks like they have a bunch of different practice areas. But the problem with you can't joining a firm with different practice areas just because they do different venues doesn't necessarily mean it's a tactical hedge. Most law firms will hire people to be not generalists. They want people that are concentrated in one practice area. So a lot of times, if that practice area slows down, it's not like they're going to throw you, like if you're doing corporate, they're going to throw you into litigation. In most cases, they will just basically say, I don't have a job for you because clients hire specialists. They don't hire generalists unless you're like in a small market. Let me see where these guys are. So they're in Washington, D.C. Yeah. So a client's not going to hire someone they hire people that have specific skills. They want you to be one type of attorney because that means that if you're committed to that practice area and you're doing it all the time, you're going to see things that a generalist wouldn't. So any company that's hiring an attorney is going to want to hire people that are specialists in a practice area. So you are now protected, I guess is my answer to you, by going to a firm where you would be has different practice areas. The only way you're protected basically is by choosing a practice area where you feel like you're going to do well and where there's going to be long-term opportunities. So what is that? You say personal injury seems like a solid practice area? Yes. And can you take other types of cases? Yes. But typically, whatever practice area you go into, you want to make sure you commit to it. Now, I'll tell everyone something about personal injury on this call or webinar that's very interesting. Personal injury, what personal injury attorneys all say to me is they say that 90 to 95% of the game is marketing and bringing in personal injury attorneys, like personal injury cases. Like most of them settle. There's formulas and things that they know how much an insurance company will pay for different things. So that's just something to keep in mind about personal injury. But yes, that's a very solid practice area. And if you understand marketing, it's also a very good practice area. But you should do, I guess my final piece of advice is for a practice area is you need to do whenever you can to find something that you like and you're passionate for. And if you do that, you're going to do better. And then this person says, thank you for that. Last thing is thank you for the answer on energy. Yeah, so I would just be very careful, again, about energy. Anytime, this is a final piece of advice to everyone, because let's see our last question. Anytime you're thinking about going into a practice area, regardless of what it is, the smartest thing you can do is to review the jobs and see how many jobs there are. And does it look safe? So does that look like a safe practice area? Look up, what do I think about personal injury? What are the jobs out there? Look up all these practice areas and try to understand what seems strongest. And then once you do that, you're going to have, and also which ones look interesting to you. If I remember when I was in college, I used to look at these books talking about the classes are, and certain classes look more interesting to me than others. And some of them I really want to take. So it should be like that when you're looking at jobs in different law firms and which jobs appeal to you, what kind of jobs get you excited. And that's really the most important thing. So thank you everyone for being on this webinar. I'm not sure what the topic will be next week, but I some kind of do a resume review. But thank you. I think this information for everybody is extremely helpful. It can help you change your career and the direction of your life if you understand practice areas and what you're choosing and the different size markets you work in and everything as well. So thanks everyone for being here.